Hi, this is Coach MJ on the Real Mission Impossible show. Today, I have Dr. Bob Choat. He has a PhD. He holds 2 PhDs. He's a martial arts expert, a former United States Marine doing recon in Vietnam. He's also served on the Los Angeles Police Department. He's been a consultant to many different businesses. He's owned his own. He's got a great story to tell, but today we've asked him to come on as an expert for our new program about Kung Fu leadership. And he's our go-to sensei and mentor to be able to walk us through the power of belief. And so, Dr. Choat, without further ado, thank you so much officially now on the Mission Impossible show. Thank you for today.
This is great, and thank you for having me on, MJ.
Yes, sir. Well, it's been an honor. We've had an opportunity to speak countless times. I've enjoyed every single conversation. I always walk away and learn from you each and every time, and I can't wait to share some of your wisdom with our audience today. The topic today, I'm using the word belief because belief is such a big part of, in psychology, they say that belief has a big part. Also in healing, belief is a big part. We've just kind of talked about that a few minutes before the show. And also in leadership. So could you just give us a little idea from a psychological point of view, how important is belief and does it actually go to work on our brains?
Sure. So yes, belief is critically important in a lot of different areas. And you mentioned belief in, for example, in a health area. And so when we believe that something can help us, that's called the placebo effect. On the other hand, if we believe something that can harm us, even though it's not proven to harm us, and like when we think about like voodoo as an example, that's a belief system that creates what's called the nocebo effect. So it's just the opposite of the placebo effect. So that's just an example in terms of those areas. When it comes to leadership, especially with ourselves, beliefs are very important. A lot of people will have a belief, and especially when they get promoted, let's say to a CEO. And one of the things I've had to deal with a lot of CEOs is their belief that they're not worthy. So they go down this deep rabbit hole, even though they're supposed to be up there and leading an organization, and they may have gotten promoted to that point where they have no idea why. But because of their actions, and they've been excellent in terms of what they did, but their belief system may end up ultimately self-sabotaging them. Now, here's the opposite of that. Overconfidence. So there are those CEOs that have a sense of overconfidence, which will lead to self-sabotage as well. So we have to balance that line when it comes to beliefs, and we have to constantly challenge the beliefs that we have. For example, things that I've learned, especially like in psychology and neuroscience, if I was to go back 20 years ago and there's stuff that I learned, well, guess what? There's new information. So we have to like challenge the beliefs that we have from something that may have worked at one time and adopt new information, because information, especially in today's world, is rapidly changing. If we were to go back to the 1920s, and I'm going to take an area of, let's say, engineering, and this would apply to a lot of different things. So the 1920s, the knowledge that one would get at that point in time, well, it remains good for about 35 years. Now we fast forward to the 1960s when things started advancing faster and information started speeding up. The information at that time that we got was good for about 10 years. Now, in today's world, anything that we learn like 3 years ago, we're going to have to now learn new stuff, because the the lifespan of information today and knowledge that we have is about 3 years. So it's constantly shifting and constantly growing. So we have to look at, did what I learned as a leader and how to run an organization or anything else 20 years ago, does it still apply today? So you have to look at it. Does it still apply today? Yes, there may be a lot of things that do, but there's a lot of stuff that don't. I know in organizations, one of the things that was big years ago, like re-engineering. So re-engineering an organization was the big buzzword. Well, it no longer applies today. And then fast forward, and then the big thing that came in later, especially in the 2000s, was a thing called Six Sigma. So a lot of these people, including leaders and everything like that, they would get people that would get their certifications in Six Sigma, and I did it. I ended up getting my Six Sigma black belt, and Six Sigma, while it applied and it worked, things shifted. Now it's much different today. So what worked 20 years ago with a lot of management principles and everything is now almost worthless because things again rapidly change. So as leaders, we have to go back and challenge our beliefs. That's one aspect of belief. The other aspect is the belief that we have in ourselves that we can get something done. And if we have a negative aspect of that, and a lot of people have these self-destructive kind of beliefs within themselves. So I suggest people to think about beliefs as a table, and you have like 4 legs on a table. And now you want to almost be like an investigator, like a police detective or a scientist. And you want to search for evidence that either confirms a belief or is it based in false information. So you want to examine it. You want to take a third person perspective when you do this. The problem is when we're in the belief itself, we become subjective. So we are not able to evaluate it in terms of the right way. So we step out, take a third person perspective, and start challenging each belief. Break it down. Be a detective. Is this really based in fact? If it's not, guess what? One leg goes away. And eventually the whole belief system that you once thought that applied to you, that maybe you weren't good enough or this and that, it comes collapsing down. So MJ, what are your thoughts on that?
I remember when you said this just a moment ago, I remember you discussing with me on some earlier sessions that we had done together online, that the human brain, for example, it was said that it only had the capacity of using, we're only using actually 5% of it, and that it had this enormous capacity. And not only that, I heard people like Tony Robbins and other speakers say this, and I repeated it in training, etc., and then latched onto it, and it became as common as the cold, or as sure as the North Star. I mean, that's the way it is. That's the information we have, and then I found out from you that's not true at all now with this new information.
Yeah. So there's even other information, because I'm constantly asking questions. Is what I learned, is it still effective? Does it still have meaning and everything like that? For example, you've heard of the 4 stages of learning.
Remind us, please.
Okay, so the 4 stages of learning, it starts out, so the first stage of learning is called gosh, my mind just went blank, and let me just bring it in. So unconscious incompetence. See, now it finally got so the first stage is unconscious incompetence. Basically, what that says is that we don't know that we don't know. Then the second stage is conscious incompetent. So that's where it now goes to we know that we don't know. The third stage is conscious competent. So as we're going through learning, now we go to that we know that we know. And the fourth stage is unconscious competent. So that means we don't know that we know. Now, this has been taught in a lot of, especially people who become trainers will learn that, but in other areas of learning. And as I started looking into this and studying other areas, and including the areas of bias, how does bias come into play in terms of our learning, in terms of our beliefs, and so forth, they have a profound effect. And it turns out that the first stage of unconscious incompetence and the fourth stage of unconscious competence, that's where biases will really show their faces. It'll really pop out. And because we don't know, we're unconscious to the biases. So when we're conscious of things in our life, including our beliefs, then we're aware that they may or may not apply. And same thing with the biases. And we may even have biases against ourselves and biases against other people. We all have biases. It's only when we're conscious of that fact is when we can make changes. So going through these four stages of learning, I more recently discovered there's actually a fifth stage that's not taught. So it's called reflective competence. So reflective competence is stepping outside of ourselves from a third person perspective and then reflecting back on what we just learned and really investigate ourselves and even taking the thing that Socrates said, know thyself. So knowing thyself is also knowing our biases. So how do our biases play into what we learn, what we teach, what we show others? So I do that now on a regular basis. I look and I would ask myself, Bob, what are your biases towards this? Because if we say that we don't have a bias, then we will never learn, we'll never grow, we'll never be able to expand. But it's only when we recognize that, when we can take control and make changes. So that's the true path to self-mastery, or even mastering of a skill, is when we understand that. That's where true wisdom comes in, is being able to have that. And as a leader, we have to recognize that as well. We have to have that ability to be reflective in terms of our own competence. And when we do that, and by the way, very few people reach that level. Again, going back to Socrates believed that only people who understand philosophy and rise to that level of wisdom should be leaders. So I learned this, and I said, if I'm going to be better at what I do, then I need to have that reflective competence incorporated in. And so what I learned before and what I taught as an NLP master trainer and teaching in other classes as a trainer or master trainer, I have to even reevaluate those aspects. So what applied years ago when I was teaching classes and so forth, and teaching the 4-stage model, I had to reevaluate, and now I'm adding the reflective competence aspect to the way I teach.
So we have to be continually learning things. We have to be lifelong learners. And if we're going to really take leadership on as a skill that we want to master, then it's a nonstop commitment to constantly improve. This is what the whole idea of Kung Fu in martial arts is constant improvement, constantly improving your life and your lifestyle. Yes?
Correct. Yeah, I've been doing martial arts ever since my mother put the stick in my hand, was teaching me kendo. I could barely even walk then, and just getting up there, just being that little toddler running around and repeating what my mother said, and as I'm doing the strikes in the air and everything like that. So it was interesting as I think back on that. And then later on in Okinawa, from age 5 to age 8, studying Goju and my sensei back during that period of time, who had been part of the early days. He was actually older at that point in time, and he had seen the transition of karate, and it wasn't called karate till later on. And there was no belt systems when he was doing it as a young man, back in the early part of the 20th century. It was just different masters getting together, people getting together and feeding off of each other, learning from each other. And there was like there wasn't like this system or this system or this system. Just people had their own ways of doing stuff and then learning. And it wasn't until when the Japanese came into Okinawa and started looking at that, they started developing this kind of system, and then they adopted the belt system from judo to create this karate, and so I like to look at when I master anything, or when I help others, including leaders, master, not to look at so much as a belt system, but as becoming a true master. If we go back to centuries ago, when we had the apprentice master system, and including in the martial arts, like if we think about the martial arts of the samurai, or the martial arts in Kung Fu in China with the monks, they didn't have a belt system. What they had was that the students would start going through a series of growth and mastery, and they would be challenged. This is something I don't see in a lot of our martial arts or our educational system organizations. They tend to have you focus in terms of one area till you get the right answer, or the right this or right that. In the old days, and still in Japan, when I look at our educational system, they challenge you in a way that you're trying to find the answer, but looking at a lot of different ways in order to get to that point. We don't do that in the United States in our educational system, nor do we do it anywhere else, because our businesses are reflection of our educational system. The way the martial arts are taught in most martial arts schools is a reflection of the Western way of thinking based on the educational system. But you go back to the ancient days, and when you had the master or the teacher, it was about you discovering a self-discovery and how something works. And I know that Bruce Lee understood this when he eventually led to his Jeet Kune Do, and he would say that in terms of Jeet Kune Do, we all find our way. You create your own Jeet Kune Do. You find what works for you and what doesn't, and then you discard the rest. So the only way we can do that is to put ourselves out there, and especially as leaders. And I don't like to say leadership styles per se. What I like to say is that your leadership persona and really, does it jive? Is it able to work with the people that you lead? Yes, a servant leadership is very important because we are serving in terms of that way constantly. Yet growth comes even as a leader and others, and is that when we're challenging ourselves to look at things different, that's where growth occurs. And it's not just following a typical pattern in order to come up with an answer, especially when it comes to leadership. That's not how the brain works. The brain works by constantly challenging and growth. And there's been like research on one of the things I was reading about, like for example, in foreign languages, is to do a pretest to see where you're at. So basically what the pretest does is that for example, in Italian language. So you have English words on one side, and you have Italian words, but you've never studied Italian, and your goal is to find out which words match which Italian word, and then later you would go and then you would look at the actual answers. And it turns out when somebody does that, they actually will learn much faster than if they're trying to being showed that this word equals this word. So once we do this pretest, and this is off anything, even in the martial arts, I am constantly testing myself. If I come across like a new martial arts or anything like that, I'm very analytical and I like to dissect it, but I like to test to see what works and what doesn't. And then when somebody shows me the actual movement and I said, aha, okay, then I absorb it, and I absorb it many, many times faster than somebody who studied in a linear fashion for years. And I was able to break down and understand Aikido in a weekend. So instead of many years, it just like, okay, I got it now. Now I know how it works.
Yes, but this is, of course, just so that we can give everybody the idea, Sensei, the fundamentals that you learned over your lifetime enabled you to do that.
Yes, I think not just the fundamentals of martial arts. It's really a lot of different things I've learned throughout my lifetime, because I'm studied in a lot of different areas that allowed me to look at, for example, Aikido. So I have a bachelor's in physics and understand physics of things, and then I studied mechanics, and I worked on a car. I was able to blueprint engines and take apart and all that kind of stuff, and even swap engines from a large engine, putting in a smaller car, and learning all that kind of stuff. And from there, I got to understand like movement from what I studied in physics to the mechanics I'm working on a car. I said, okay, so this is how Aikido works. It's basically just three wheels in terms of, you have the short wheel, you got the steering wheel kind of thing, so you can steer people the way you want them to go. You got these big wheels, so you can now like direct people this way, right? And then you have this large wheel. So it's all about like all these circular patterns in terms of moving. So you got even like really tiny wheels, this wheel, then this wheel here. So you got even the tiny wheel like this, like when you're doing like with the hand and doing a throw like that. So but it's all very simple if you understand that. And you're able to move like your body in terms of that way, then it's it gets embedded into you once you figure it out, and you're able to apply all this kind of stuff. And so I've been able to look at not just Aikido but other martial arts, and being able to break it down in terms of own mind and simplify it and make adjustments and learning. I started off learning by making mistakes, and then I would come back from the mistakes and I would learn much faster. So I wasn't like showed, do it this way, do it this way, do it this way. I just went out and I just did it. And then I understood that I had mistakes, and then I was shown this way, this way, and this way. So that absorbed into me. Like Kali, doing Kali. So I made my mistakes in terms of doing it. I thought I was doing it right, but I went out and did it. And then I was shown the right way. Aha, this is easy.
And I understand one of your part-time hobbies these days is parkour.
Parkour, yes. Yeah, I made my mistakes in that, and I paid for it. And I remember I showed you the video that I had on YouTube, and my face was all smashed up from a parkour fail. And so I went out and I made my mistakes. And then I got a teacher who, in fact, I got actually several parkour teachers that were high-level parkour practitioners known as tracers, but they were instructors. They had been in movies, doing movie stunts with parkour and everything. And so I learned from there, where they showed me the precision of the movement. And so what I thought I was doing right, I was completely doing wrong. But I went out there, I made my mistakes, then I was shown the right way and it tested out, and just going back and forth and all that kind of stuff. I think the problem with a lot of people, like with parkour, they'll watch these people doing something like that, or martial arts, or anything else. They'll watch YouTube videos, and they think that they can do that. No, you can't. You're not going to be able to jump from one building to the next if you don't know the precision. But you want to make your mistakes at the lower level so you don't kill yourself. Like there's been people that's jumped and they've fallen to their death because they did not know what they were doing. So it's really key in anything that you make your mistakes at a lower level so you don't make high level mistakes, and then you learn from those mistakes, and you learn, and maybe you get a coach or something like that can teach you specific techniques that will increase your precision, your accuracy, but also developing your physical body. But this applies to anything. It applies to leadership. You have somebody, a coach that can help you in terms of your leadership abilities. You're going to go out there, you're going to make mistakes. And if you're a CEO, if you're or in a C level, and you don't have like true leadership background and skills and everything, and you go out there because you've been promoted, and I recall the book, the Peter Principle, and in the book, Dr. Peter, he talked about that people will be promoted to the level of incompetence. You remember that book, right?
I remember hearing about the Peter Principle and being told as a young leader that the Peter Principle was exactly that, to be promoted to their level of incompetence. And I'm not sure if they were trying to tell me something or not, but what I did realize is that what you've said now about the mastery of parkour, where you needed to fail fast and learn, correct, improve, get coaches, improve. The same for martial arts. And you've risen and mastered several martial arts. Now we're segueing that over to leadership. And the question is, where many people think that leadership is something that, that they're at the maternity ward, there's boys, there's girls, and there's leaders. But others know that people like yourself, certainly like me, who, miserably had to go through learning curves in leadership to be able to increase their ability. There has to be fundamentals to follow, and fundamentals that can be taught so that leaders can master their skills.
Correct. The problem I see where people confuse the nurture versus nature aspect of leadership, where people are born leaders, and there's that falsehood. What they're looking at are these people who have a high level of narcissism, and that raises the level of confidence to the level of overconfidence, and so the person that gets out there and they talk a good talk and all this kind of stuff, and they say that I have all the answers when it comes to running this organization or doing this as a leader, without really understanding the issues at hand. And while you see these people making gut decisions, and sometimes there's successes, a lot of times what people don't hear about are the failures through that kind of stuff. And a problem with the high narcissist when it comes to leadership is that they'll blame the failures on other people, and they will accept all the successes. Even if the success came from somebody else, they will accept the success. They'll say, this is mine, this is what I did. And then when the failures, you guys did it, I didn't have anything to do with it. But people think that person is a true leader, and when they're not. True leaders are the ones that, again, I talked earlier about the servant leader. True leaders take the responsibility of the failures to their self, and the successes is to the team, to the organization, to other people who had the contributions. So while it's important for us to acknowledge in terms of the positive things that we did, but we also have to acknowledge the bad things that happen, because if we don't acknowledge that, we'll never be able to make adjustments. It goes back to what you said earlier, the failure aspect. If you don't acknowledge that you made some decisions that caused a failure to happen, and a lot of people are scared to acknowledge that they can lose, that they can fail, and that is a big sign of a toxic leader, when you cannot accept failure and when you get into the blame aspect. So you want to go to being a growth-oriented leader, because you're going to fail as a leader. It's really important when you acknowledge that failure. You can say, okay, what happened? What decisions did I make that led to this? And how can I make adjustments? Did I maybe delegate wrong? Did I do A, B, and C wrong? So when you're able to step back, and I said earlier regarding the stages of growth, and you have the reflective part, right? Reflective competence. That's the part in reflective competence you're looking back and you're saying, okay, what happened here? How did this happen? How did Bob? So now I'm taking a third person view. How did Bob allow this to happen? What did Bob do? What were Bob's thoughts? Was he biased in the decisions that he made? Was Bob not understanding the organization of the process as a whole, or anything else? So when you take it from that perspective, without having yourself in it emotionally, then you can really make the changes necessary when you're back in as a leader, and that's really key. And I like to use taking the aspect of being a detective on my own leadership style, or anything else that I do. So I'm the detective, I'm the scientist, and I'm able to make adjustments and maybe change the formula in terms of what I did.
And something like that in leadership would be having the guidelines, having the fundamental roadmap being made, and then having the leader learn these fundamentals so that they can master this. And once they can have their own style. But without doing anything like that, they run the risk of bringing in observations of leadership, sometimes wrong observations, or observations of people doing leadership in a wrong way. And that can bring toxicity into an organization.
Correct. You know, I think about like leadership moments, and I recall the battle at Gettysburg back during the Civil War back in 1863, July 1st to the 3rd to be precise, and had Gettysburg fallen, the South, led by Robert E. Lee's forces, could have marched all the way to Washington, D.C., and things would have completely shifted at that point in time. And you want to talk about like leadership on the go, and really understanding and making decisions on a fly. So there was an area at the Battle of Gettysburg called Little Round Top. And Little Round Top was on the left flank of the Union Army. And it was a critical area, very strategic. Had Little Round Top fallen, just that one area, that's where the 14th and 15th, particularly the 15th Alabama, was rushing up. Had that area fallen, they could have, the Confederacy would have flanked around and overtook the Union Army, and they would have fallen. So Little Round Top was left in the hand of the 20th Maine. So 20th Maine was led by Colonel Joshua Chamberlain, and he had been a teacher at a college in Maine. And he was asked to come and join the Union Army. He was automatically promoted to lieutenant colonel, and then eventually to colonel at the Battle of Gettysburg. Now he had two brothers that were also in. He had one brother that was there with the 20th Maine, and he had another brother that was a chaplain. And so Joshua Chamberlain, at that Battle of Gettysburg at Little Round Top, and they were in a fierce battle with both the 14th and 15th Alabama, and they were holding that hill, Little Round Top, and they were running out of ammo. They were down just to a few rounds left, and Colonel Chamberlain made the decision that would change the course of history. He told his men, you know, basically we have run out of ammo. He told them to fix bayonet, and his captain also told his line. So he says, we're going to do this almost like this door thing. You're going to lead from one side, and I'm going to lead from the other side, and we're going to charge down after the 14th and 15th Alabama. So the 14th, 15th Alabama, they were shooting, but they did not expect what happened. To see these troops running down after them, and it was like crazy. And as the 20th Maine got closer, both the 14th and 15th Alabama, they turned around and they ran back down a hill. And eventually there was 100 and something of the Confederate troops that were taken prisoner by the 20th Maine. And they secured Little Round Top, and eventually the charge that Robert E. Lee had to the center failed, because they expected that they would be able to come around on the other side, and and Gettysburg was secured, and the Union was able to hold eventually. We know the rest in terms of the end of the Civil War, but that decision made a profound difference, and a lot of times it comes from experience, because we experienced certain things, and Colonel Chamberlain had some smaller battles that he engaged in, and he understood his men. He understood a lot of things, plus his experience in terms of his education as well, where he understood in terms of human behavior and so forth, and motivation, that led him to be able to make that decision, which was very, very powerful. And he later became governor of Maine, and in 1915 he passed away from the wounds that he had during the Civil War. So he was actually the last Civil War veteran to succumb to his wounds. So so that was an interesting story when I heard about it in terms of leadership. It's taught in leadership. I have my master's in leadership, and it was one of the stories that I learned and that I embraced, and I thought it was a very powerful reminder that leadership can come from all areas. Joshua Chamberlain was a servant leader, and he was there to serve with his men. He led from the front. He led down, charging down a hill with his men, instead of staying back and telling his men to go charge down. He suffered wounds in battle that almost killed him, and it wasn't until 1915 when he finally died from it. But he should have died earlier, but he managed to survive a battle later on after Gettysburg, and again, he was very well respected by his men and by the Confederate generals, because he's shown respect for them as well. And respect is a very, very important part of leadership, and a lot of principles from leadership that I learned when I was in the Marine Corps. And by the way, there's no such thing as a former Marine. There's a Marine veteran like that. So I just wanted to let you know.
Semper Fi, thank you for your service, sir. My bad.
Yeah. So those are the aspects that I continue to learn from others, from history, how leaders are created, and he was a leader that was created from his learnings and everything, and he grew to become a fine military leader, and eventually a leader leading the state of Maine and so forth, and continuing his journey after being a governor back in education, and that shows me that he's just another example of many, many people, whether in the military leaders or business leaders, of true leaders that continue to grow. I think you have to have a growth mindset to be a really good leader, and a nurturing necessary, because he had a good family background. He came from a religious family, but taught a lot of the values back from the 19th century in terms of that. So, yeah, so there was a lot of aspects in terms of leadership that we can be developed into good leaders. So that's what my take on that.
Wow, you just unpacked a complete show on that story, and it is an overwhelming example of how impactful good leadership can be. He would never been able to turn to his men and ask them to do something almost so suicidal had they not respected, trusted, and understood that this is the epiphany moment, and I trust this leader to do this. This is our way that we're going to execute ourselves out of this fiasco and turn it into a victory. And obviously, he turned the tide of American history. So, what a great lesson to learn from you again, Dr. Bob Choat. There's a reason that you are Dr. Bob Choat, and that is because you're there to help us all understand some of these great things and great attributes about leadership, martial arts, and all the good things that you bring to the table. I look forward to our next session. And until then, thank you so much and continue to lead on, sir.
Hoorah. Thank you.
Hoorah.